Hello, I'm John Borrego. I am the interim priest at St. John's Episcopal Church in Norman, Oklahoma. And today this is the second of a series of talks on the growth and development of Christianity in the early centuries of the period in which it grew up. Today we're going to be talking about Yeshu bar Yosef, who is this guy. The first thing maybe we should say a word about his name, that it was given to him in his time, and the name by which we have come to know him. The language of the area of Galilee in which Jesus grew up was Aramaic. It was a language related to and similar to Hebrew, but not absolutely identical. And the name Yeshu was the Aramaic version of Yeshua, or Joshua, as we would say, the character from the Hebrew Bible. Now, when the New Testament was written and when Christianity began to spread through the Roman Empire, the most common language that was used in most places was Greek. So the name Yeshu was transliterated into Greek. The Greek of that time did not have a sh sound, so Yeshu became Jesus, and that later was translated into Latin, again, as Jesus. And then later on, in late Latin, the J sound came into use for that letter I, or iota. And so that is why today, in our English language, we call him Jesus. Well, let's take a look at his life. First of all, let's begin with the question of where and when he was born. You all have your nativity sets at home with your shepherds and angels and manger and wise men. And so we all think we know the story, but it's a little more complicated than what we might think. Two of the Gospels say nothing whatsoever about the birth of Jesus. He's not mentioned, or the birth is not mentioned in either Mark or John. Luke has the story, after the Annunciation to Mary, of Joseph and Mary going to Bethlehem for the purpose of taking part in an imperial census, which, as they say, Caesar Augustus ordered for the whole world. Matthew tells the story of while they are in Bethlehem and have been visited by the wise men, they flee the soldiers of Herod the Great, who have been sent in to slaughter all of the children under 2 years of age. Now, these stories are really very mutually inconsistent with each other. First of all, let's return to Luke's story. He tells us that this census or enrollment was the one that was done when Quirinius was governor of Syria. Publius Sulpicius Quirinius became the imperial legate or governor of Syria in the year 6 AD. Now, we do not have a direct Roman history source that he ordered a census at that time, but it would not be unlikely that he would want to know what was in his territory and what the resources were. What is somewhat unlikely would be that people would be ordered from their homes to the territory of their ancestors, because if you think about that, that would involve an enormous economic disruption with people traveling all over, if not the whole empire, at least within that one territory of the province of Syria. So that right there makes it a little bit unlikely. Now let's turn to Matthew's version, in which Herod the Great, after being told by the wise men that the Messiah is to be born in Bethlehem, orders the slaughter of all of those children, which eventually sends Mary and Joseph and the baby Jesus into exile in Egypt. Herod the Great died in 4 BC, 10 years before Quirinius became the governor of Syria. So the timeline is not consistent. And what about Jesus' birth in Bethlehem? Now, the Gospels very much connect him with his descent from King David, who of course was famously from Bethlehem. But can we accept this necessarily historically? After all, the genealogies of Jesus run through the male line. We are told that he was the son of Joseph, who was the son of so-and-so, the son of so-and-so, all the way back either to David or to Abraham or to Adam himself. The gospel writers were very anxious to connect Jesus with the descent from King David, and so therefore there is the story of Bethlehem. Now, Jesus in his entire life was known as Jesus of Nazareth, not Jesus of Bethlehem. So I will leave it to you. I can't say that we are absolutely certain that the gospel accounts are historically inaccurate. I'm just saying that questions can be raised about them. Well, let's think about Jesus' life once he is back and settled in Nazareth. The Gospels give us very, very little information about him as he is growing up. We are told that his father was a carpenter, and we presume that Jesus apprenticed in the carpenter shop of his father. There are different traditions about what sort of carpenter Joseph was. Some say he was a humble maker of things like ox yokes and fence posts. Some say that he made fine furniture. The word teknon, carpenter, that is used of him can also mean something a bit grander than that, what we today might call an architect or a contractor. So it may be that he actually worked on construction projects. At the time of Jesus' childhood, the city of Tiberias was being built on the shores of the Sea of Galilee, and it surely would have involved vast numbers of laborers and contractors to build that city. So who knows? It may be that that is one place where Joseph and his boy Jesus might have found work in Jesus' younger days. What about his family? His mother, of course, was Mary, and there are several references in the Gospels to the brothers of Jesus. In fact, they're actually named several times. Now, later Christian doctrine was a little uncomfortable with this idea that he would have had brothers, but there's nothing in the Gospels that would necessarily contradict that. So he may have grown up in this family of a number of siblings. Well, what about his education? Jews were among the most highly literate people of the time because the study of the Scripture was so very important to them. So he would have learned at an early age to read and write. And again, the daily language that he spoke was Aramaic. He would have known Hebrew in his study of the Hebrew Bible. And he might very well have known at least some Greek, because that was the international language of the Eastern Roman Empire. Very much as almost anywhere you travel in the world today, you will find people who speak English. And a few centuries ago, it would have been French. And before that, it would have been Latin. So Jesus most likely would have understood and spoken a certain amount of Greek. Now, here's something that is a bit of a mystery to us. When we begin the stories of Jesus in his adulthood, it appears that he is unmarried. That would have been very unusual for a man of that period in that culture. Most young men would have married at the age of 17, 18, or 19, and we don't know that Jesus did not, but we don't know that he did. Some Jewish men in Jesus' time and before did take vows of celibacy. We do not have specific reference that Jesus took these vows, became what was known as a Nazarite, essentially almost a solitary monastic. But again, it's possible that he might have. Let's think a minute about what did Jesus look like. Again, we have no physical descriptions of him at all in the Gospels. Our picture of him is more or less like this, with a beard and long flowing hair. Those come from The earliest versions of pictures of that are from the Byzantine period, but again, we know nothing really of his appearance. Like most people of his time and his place and his culture, he was probably darker skinned. The wearing of long flowing hair among men was very uncommon at that time, for the very practical reason is that it was harder to keep the lice out of your hair if it was long. So maybe we might imagine him as a dark-skinned, short-haired man. Average height of men at that time was 5'7" to 5'9", so by our standards he would not have been particularly tall. Well, once he began his public ministry, he developed a great reputation as a teacher, as a preacher, and as a healer. At first, he gathered together a small circle of followers, whom we came to know as the disciples. The word disciple in English, mathetes in Greek, means one who learns, a student, you might say. So they were the ones who followed him to learn from him. And that's why we see him in the Gospels addressed as master or rabbi. He also developed a great reputation as a healer. It was said that he could lay his hands on the sick or even speak a few words, and they would be healed. By the beliefs of the time, many illnesses were caused by demonic possessions, and it was said that he could cast out demons. Whatever was going on there, it soon became clear that large crowds were gathering around him. And some were proclaiming him the Messiah. The Messiah, HaMashiach, in Hebrew and Aramaic, was a figure that was hoped and prayed for in Jewish tradition. This was to be a great king who descended from David, would come and would drive out the oppressors of the Romans and usher in a period of prosperity and peace and happiness and self-rule. Well, no doubt, these rumors that Jesus was this Messiah, this king, began to filter up to the Jewish authorities and, more importantly, to the Romans themselves. The one thing that Roman political life could not bear was a king. The Roman tradition was that in 509 BC they had cast out the kings of Rome and set up a republic, and if you were a Roman politician and you wanted to insult a rival, you would say, he wants to be a king. That, by the way, was the very reason that Julius Caesar was assassinated. They were afraid, his opponents, that he would set himself up as a king. So if these rumors of supposed kingship came to the ears of the Romans, they would consider this very dangerous. Now, the Gospels tell us that the high authorities within the Jewish state as well were feeding the anxieties of the Romans, that Jesus was intending to establish a monarchy. So eventually, he was seen as dangerous and seditious, and he was arrested. And he was brought for trial before Pontius Pilate, the prefect or governor of Judea. Now, we are told in John's Gospel that Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And this is the first part of a little dialogue between Jesus and Pilate. I think possibly in real life that would have been the first and the last question. We don't tolerate anybody who even might be a king from the Roman point of view. So Jesus was ordered to the punishment of crucifixion. Crucifixion was a horrible, monstrous, torturous death that was reserved for those who were considered to be dangerous criminals who had to be made an example of. In the 1960s, archaeologists discovered the skeleton of a man who had been crucified, And if anything, it's probably even worse than we imagine it from 1,000 depictions of it in art and even in the movies. The body of this man that was discovered by the archaeologists had large nails, think of them as the size of railroad spikes, driven through the bones of the forearms. Our usual image of crucifixion being through the palms wouldn't have worked very well because your weight of your body would have torn through, and that would have kind of defeated the purpose of the length of the torture. The legs of this man who was crucified were twisted to one side, and a single nail was driven between his heels. Now, the dreadful thing about crucifixion is that it was impossible to find anything like a comfortable position. Because if you pushed yourself up on your feet, then those were suffering terrible pain. And if you hung by your arms, they were suffering terrible pain. And of course, there would be blood loss, and this would often be done out in an exposed place in the heat of the day. And what would eventually kill you was suffocation, because the diaphragm and the muscles of your chest would eventually become too exhausted for you to live on. And then normally your body would be left out to rot and be attacked by vultures and scavengers, again, as an example to those who might think to follow you in some way. Well, of course, that's not where the story of Jesus, of Yeshu bar Yosef, ends in the Gospels. And I'd like to address the resurrection in my next discussion, which will be about the faith and the practice of early Christianity. So I hope my description of crucifixion hasn't put you off too much, because as we Christians know, that is not the end of the story. Well, I'll see you next time, and thanks for listening.